Yo, what is up, guys? My name is Jack Gardiner. I hope you're all having an amazing MIGS Montreux International Guitar Show so far. Do you mind if I start with a track? Is that cool for you guys? Wicked. Let's give this a go. Thank you very much, guys. So, my name is Jack Gardiner. I'm from Liverpool in England, so I'm going to try and speak really slowly because I know my accent is fucking difficult to understand. Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. But I do want to make a special mention actually today before I go into this masterclass. My beautiful wife is over there with my beautiful baby. She's just turned 1 today. So I just want to wish a massive happy birthday. You know, when you grow up, Eva, you'll be like, Dad, why did you drag me to a guitar show for my first birthday? I hope you don't look back at me and kill me later on, you know. But anyway, that tune was a track called Sky Blue Pink featuring Owain, who's a keyboard player, producer, now the godfather of my child. Yeah, I mean, basically today, I want to play one more track for you, and then I want to talk about maybe how I visualize the fretboard. We're going to talk about improvisation. We're going to talk about basically what I like to do with guitar. Maybe we can get the gear out of the way first, though. By the way, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask, even if it's now, you know. Is there any questions already? No, everyone's super nervous there. So yeah, in terms of gear, I've been using Ibanez guitars now for about a year and a half, the AZ, this one over here. Ibanez do actually have a booth in the other room if you want to check it out, but essentially it's based off of the classic S-type guitar. You know, you've got the roasted maple neck, you have basically HSS configuration. Actually, my pickups that I'm using are not the stock Seymour Duncan pickups. They are a guy who stood right over here. He's based in Sion, Hugo Sierra. So these are custom made. I guess they're kind of low output to get that more traditional kind of Strat sound, you know. But if you do want to check out these guitars, I do believe they have 2 in there, the Ibanez AZN. In terms of tone, I'm actually using the Neural DSP Quad Cortex, but that is not what you're hearing in terms of an amp. I'm running the plugins in here. So all of that tone, I'm using the Fort and Cali suite for my lead tones. Sounds a little bit like this. Which to me sounds good enough. It saves my back dragging a big Friedman amp everywhere. And the clean tone is going to be, if it doesn't disappear on me, the Tone King, which again is another plugin. Sounds a little bit like this. Really, really handy. All you need is a laptop, plug in, job done, kind of thing. So, this next track which I'm going to play before we go into like the teaching side of things is a track called UTFF, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say what that stands for. It basically features Henrik Linder on bass. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the band Dirty Loops. Does anyone know Dirty Loops here? Yeah, they were like mine and Owain's like childhood heroes. I remember hearing that at like 15, and I was like, holy, this is harmony. This is what you can do with music. So Henrik features on this track. There's a huge bass solo in the middle of it. Actually, I'm going to try and play some of Owain's parts because it's a duo album, so I'm not taking all the leads all the time. Wish me luck, because this is quite hard to play Owain's parts, but yeah. Let's give this a go. This is UTFF. By the way, if you are interested, I think I will have the CDs for sale over there. There was only a limited run that we did, but afterwards come over and say hey, and I'll give you a CD if you're interested. Let me just make sure my click is on here for the intro, and we're good to go. So this is UTFF featuring Henrik Linder. Bass solo, sorry. Cheers, guys. Nice one. That was Henrik Linder on the bass. So yeah, today I thought, now that we've got the tracks out of the way, one of the things I want to talk about really is about my approach and how I visualize the instrument. I think as guitar players, you know, we often struggle to break down how we can actually approach the guitar in terms of improvisation because of the nature of it. You know, we get taught a lot about cage system and 3-note per strings. This is all the kind of stuff that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And they are great, and they are perfectly usable ways of navigating the fretboard. But I often hear that people say they get stuck in box shapes, and they get stuck in these kind of rigid patterns. For those of you that don't know what cage system is, essentially we take the letters of the name cage and split that up into 5 areas of the fretboard. So you'd have like C shape, A, then we've got the G shape, we've got the E shape, and then, can't even spell, and then you've got the D shape at the end there, and it repeats. So that breaks us down into these 5 boxes. 3-note per string is another way of thinking about it, where you have these shapes that go across, and you move through the positions. But that really isn't like a musical way, in my opinion, of actually being able to improvise. It doesn't give you those tools. The way which I do it was the way in which I was taught by my old teacher, Tom Quayle. Are any of you guys familiar with Tom Quayle? He's an absolute monster, isn't he? But he obviously tunes differently. He tunes in fourths. So these top 2 strings, B and E, are actually C and F for him. That means that any kind of interval pattern that he learns becomes the same. The issue with that tuning, though, is if you try and play any kind of open chord, you get this. Which, I mean, you can't play Sweet Home Alabama with that, can you? It's a nightmare. But the way in which he uses this, then, is to view the fretboard not in terms of necessarily note names. All we are concerned about is the root. So long as you know the name of the root note, you're good to go with this. So one thing which I tend to get students to do is to take like a C major scale on the low E string, starting with your first finger, and to play through, you know, the typical shape of... But instead of just thinking of that as a pattern, to visually connect what each interval within this scale shape is. So a major second, for example, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seven, and then we're back to the root, obviously. The thing with this is that you should be able to essentially identify them at will. So you want to be able to go, okay, I want to play a major sixth. It's there. I want to play a perfect fourth. It's there. And all of these have like characteristics to them. They have not only the visual shape that you learn, between what a fourth looks like from that first finger. You have obviously a description of a sound, which is what, when we just do things by note names, C to D means nothing unless you already know that that is a major second interval. You know, if you pick any key and you know the root note then, so say like, I don't know, let's pick G, those intervals will look the same compared to that root note. So if I want that major sixth again, perfect fourth, it works exactly the same essentially. Now, rather than just do it with that first finger, what I would then get people to do is say, okay, start from that same root note, that low C here on the low E string, and start with the second finger. Do the same thing in terms of, okay, can I find what a sixth looks like? Can I find what the fourth looks like? This kind of thing, just within small areas of the fretboard. You don't need to do the whole thing at once. I think this is a mistake that a lot of people make, is that they think, right, I want to dash in, I want to be able to play all over the place. Personally, I think it's better if you limit yourself and you really are able to use the tools within that small area of the fretboard. Now, I'd do that, I'd continue on. We did the first finger, so you'd have second finger, third finger, and then the fourth finger. And you learn those interval shapes within there. Then you could move on to the A string, and you'll see actually this first pattern is exactly the same as the low E because the tuning permits it with the first finger. So if I start up here, that's exactly the same as... So the interval shapes look exactly the same so far. Second finger's the same. It's only when we get to the third finger that we get an issue, and that is because of this B string where we're not tuned in fourths. For Tom Quayle, like I say, my old teacher, this would not be an issue for him, and that's exactly why he does it. But if we start with the third finger, we get this shape, where that first finger has to move up a fret, rather than down here, where it looks like that. But you would continue on through each string set, doing that exact same thing. So D string, G string, etc., until you've covered the whole fretboard. And that way, you know C major, regardless of what finger you land on. Anywhere on the fretboard, you should be able to see a C major scale around that. Now, another reason for using these interval formulas is that when it comes to playing other scale types then, or modes, I know that can be a scary word, but essentially, I just view scales as interval formulas. So the major scale is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I wanted to play a Dorian scale, all I would think of is like 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. So if I convert C major into C Dorian, all I need to do is know what those intervals look like compared to that root note. It negates this need for, oh, C Dorian, what's that part of? That's part of B flat, so I need to think of B. That's way too complicated when you're improvising, at least for me anyway. I know some guys can do it, but I'd rather just see how those notes function against the chord. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, oh, but intervals, when you've played like this is a different interval. No, I'm thinking in terms of the root note. It's just the function of the interval itself. But anyway, that would mean then that any scale type, so long as you know the formula, no matter how complex that scale is, you should be able to work it out if you know what visually those intervals look like. And you should be able to improvise with it if you are familiar with the sounds of those intervals as well. You know, there's more things that we'll get into in a bit in terms of language and stuff like that, but that is kind of the fundamental for me anyway, is visualizing this not as scale shapes and patterns, it's intervals essentially. Now, the other thing which I always say is really important to learn, especially if you want to be like a session guy. I did a load of stuff with 80s bands where, you know, it might sound simple and stuff, but you need to know your chord vocab. The very first thing I'd say to all of you out there is learn your triad shapes. Like, they should be... You shouldn't even have to think of them. By that, I mean, like, you know, if you take something simple like C major, root third, fifth, sorry, I'm a bit out of tune, but you should be able to go... with no issues in any key, major, minor, diminished, etc. That is such a fundamental thing. Really helps with the improvisation as well because you are visualizing those chord tones, of course, like the root, the major, third, fifth, etc. But they are kind of fundamental. The other thing I would do is I would think of 3 main chord types to start off with. This was kind of similar to the first lesson Tom Quayle gave me, where he basically said, look, do you know a major 7 chord? And I kind of went, yeah, this one. There we go. Pass the test. And then he was like, play me another one. And I was like, there we go. He was like, play me one more. And I'm starting to get a bit nervous now. I was like, oh, there we go. And then he said, play me another. And I was just like, man, I have no idea. I'm out of chords here. So he broke it down and he was like, right, first things first that you should learn are just shell voicings. So with like a major 7 or a minor 7 chord and all these kind of things, we think of like 1, 3, 5, 7. We're stacking in thirds. A shell voicing is where we totally get rid of the fifth. The fifth, I like to call it like the potato interval. It doesn't really add any flavor to the chord. It doesn't tell you what chord type you're playing over unless it's altered in some way, unless there's like a flattened fifth or a raised fifth. It just sits there. I think that's why it's used in rock music all the time, because you just don't know what chord type it is. It blends in. Whereas if you play C major 7, C dominant 7, C minor 7 like that, the fifth has stayed constant through all of them. So a shell voicing essentially gets rid of that. And all we do is we take the root, third, and seventh. So a major 7 would be root, major third, major 7. And you can clearly hear that that's a major 7 chord. You don't need this note in there whatsoever. So that tells me that the third and the seventh are kind of like the key to whatever chord type we are playing, essentially. If you know what the third and seventh are, you know what chord type, regardless of extensions and any crazy stuff that might go on over the top. So the first one would be C major 7. C dominant 7 would be the next one, so that's root, major third, flat 7. You've got C minor 7, which would just be root, flat 3, minor 7. They're the 3 that I want to talk about today. I'd learn a couple of shapes for them. So you've got C major 7, C dominant 7, C minor 7. Then what I would do is look at what extensions I can add onto the top of them. This is before we go into how we'd improvise over them. But essentially, an extension is just a note from the scale that isn't 1, 3, 5, 7, that's above. So the way I think of that is the major second, which is the same as the major ninth. We get this if it was a major 7 chord. That's our first one. Now the next note would be the 4th or the 11th. But if I play a natural 4th over this major 7 chord, listen to how disgusting this sounds. It's just like, oh, hell, that is haunting for me anyway. So what we do is we raise that 11th or the 4th and we get a sharp 11. So this actually tells me that the scale I would play over a C major 7 chord is not C major. It would not work. That 4th does not sit well. The last extension would be the 13. Essentially, I would do that with these shapes as well. So 9th, sharp 11, 13. Moving on to dominant 7. If this is an unaltered dominant chord, we're not going to get that fancy yet. I would take the 9th. I would take the 11th if I wanted to. So I could do this kind of sound. This is a nicer voicing, actually. This kind of sound. And then the 13th. And these are all from the Mixolydian scale, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. This brings me back to, that point I made earlier about a major scale and learning it in terms of the intervals. If you know this, all you have to think is, right, I just flatten that 7th and play a minor 7. And if you've learned that C major already, you just need to apply that to every single finger shape that you've done. It makes life way easier, in my opinion anyway. So, that'll be dominant 7 chords. We've got the 11th, 13. Then minor 7, so we get minor 9 would be the first one. Or if you want to be fancy. We've got the 11th, which would work. Or this. Are any of you familiar with Guthrie Govan, the guitarist? Do you guys know Guthrie? So you know that tune? That's that minor 11 chord, basically. The last one would be a major 6, not a minor 6. You get, if I play a minor 6 over that sound, it's going to sound really, really nasty if you hear. It sounds like it wants to resolve to me. Whereas if I raise that to a major 6, that sounds like it'll sit. That sounds kind of cool. That is the Dorian scale. So it tells me that if I'm playing over these kind of like static chords, that actually a natural minor scale is not going to work over a minor 7 chord unless you move away from that flat 6 quickly. So Dorian would be like the go-to sound for me over minor 7. Over dominant 7, mixed Lydian works fine. And then over major 7, it actually wouldn't be a major scale, it would be Lydian. So that sharp 4. So just to quickly demonstrate. It's this note, it's this tritone. By itself can sound evil, you put it in a chord. Sounds way, way nicer. But enough of the background information anyway. What I would do if you guys are totally new to this is I would take pentatonic scales. We all know pentatonics, right? We all know those 5 positions that we go through. I still think that that is the go-to sound when I am improvising. They are so useful whether you're a beginner or intermediate or an advanced player. It's where all the juice comes from. If you think of the guitar as an instrument, most of our nice phrasing actually comes from the blues guys. It's pentatonic over everything, and it's because the phrasing works really well with the instrument itself. So I would take, let's just take one of these chords, like a minor 7 chord, and I would first start with just the pentatonic, but visualizing it in terms of intervals. So we take the key of E minor, everyone knows E minor. We go root, flat 3, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, minor 7 or flat 7, root, and that just repeats. But I would try and think, okay, what intervals have I got in there from the chord? So I've got the minor 3rd, I've got the 5th, I've got the root obviously, and I've got the flat 7. The only note which is extra is the 4th, which could be an extension. That would make it sound like this chord, a minor 11 chord. So I could focus on, if I want to make the sound of the chord, I could focus on either those chord tones, or if I want to add a bit of flavor, you could stick on that 11th. But just with the pentatonic, you should be able to phrase. There's no point in learning crazy scales if, I don't think anyway personally, if you've not got some language within the pentatonic already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play over a bit of a loop over a minor 7 chord, and we're just going to see what a pentatonic sounds like if we can manipulate it. Did just play a 9th, but that is just essentially pentatonic scales. It's the whole typical. But it doesn't have to sound cliche. It doesn't have to be, you know, your typical, which is cool as well. But there's so much to explore with just those 5 notes, I think, anyway. It's down to your phrasing, it's down to your dynamics, it's down to the way in which you manipulate notes, your time feel. Time feel is probably the biggest thing that as guitarists we face as an issue. I'm firmly of the belief that you can be a guy with really bad technique and maybe not the craziest of chops and stuff, but if you've got good time feel, you're going to get the gig, you're going to pay the bills essentially. I'd much rather hear someone play 3 notes that are with really good time feel than 100 notes that are sloppy and all over the place. But we'll get on to time feel a little bit more later on. First of all, are there any questions so far? I know I haven't taken a break at all. Yeah, man. Yeah. picking, you mean? Okay, can I just repeat that question then for you, man? Yeah, so essentially, was it Fernando? Did we meet before? Ah, man, lovely to see you again. So that question was about legato technique. My old teacher, Tom Quayle, I'm convinced he's like the best, or one of the best legato players in the world. And he was a massive, massive inspiration for me. But we don't play legato, I think, in the same way as like the Joe Satriani or like the Vai, where, you know, that kind of stuff. It's more like a tool to create lines. I suck at alternate picking, and like that legato just felt way easier for me. The first thing I would say is like you want to be able to make sure that the fingers have good time feel. So like with legato, rather than do, I mean, the Joe Satriani thing is cool to do. What is it? That's a cool thing to do, but you want to make sure that every single note in there is perfectly in time. You know, a lot of guys, I'll try and emulate it now, but you get a lot of, you know, where certain notes are longer than others and certain ones are shorter and it doesn't really flow. That's the key with it is you want every note with like the same attack, but also the same length. I think that's what makes it work. But also, like, you can try exercises like this, where we start adding in some chromaticism. To keep that perfectly in time is an absolute nightmare, and it's because of the pinky. I always find you want to record yourself always with this and really be kind of brutal in the sense of does this fall in line, you know, with the time kind of thing. But then you can start developing lines like, I played with bad time feel there. That's a great example of how not to do it. But things like, that's where it becomes kind of a bit more musical. So when we were, and I think Tom does this the same way, the way I'd actually develop legato lines would be to take like a rhythmic figure, like say 16th note, or let's go 8th notes first. So I'm going to just play a Dorian scale here, and I would just try to play consistently, but improvise as well, so. The idea of trying to keep a constant flow of these notes going is kind of the key. I know I deviated a little bit there, but I would do that for like 2 hours just with like one scale type and try and see not only where the fingers lead you, but where the ears lead you. So it's less of like a technique for technique's sake. It's more just a way of playing lines that you'd like to play in a musical way. Does that answer the question, man? Yeah. The other one, what was that about hybrid picking? Right, okay, so hybrid picking, do you guys all know what hybrid picking is? Just for anyone who doesn't, hybrid picking is essentially where you're using the pick, but also these three fingers. If I'm using it in a lead sense, it's more so to string skip. That's the whole idea. I was always really bad at, you know, the Paul Gilbert thing, that kind of thing. So the cheat way out of this is to use the middle finger, and you get... So, like, a good starting exercise for this is to just take, like, a pentatonic. Let's do A minor. And I would take, like, D and the G string, and I'd just literally pick with the right hand this. And with the middle finger, I would hybrid pick the G string, and then pick again. This is consistently legato, so I'm not picking all of the notes, but... And that kind of negates the need to do, which I absolutely suck at. I can't alternate pick at all. But you could then, if you get that down, you can apply it to the rest of the pentatonic scale. So you know, you go. Any arpeggio shapes, or Yeah, those kind of ideas. Anytime there's a gap in the strings, that's where I play the hybrid picking. But I mainly use it these days. I don't necessarily use that in my lead playing as much. It's mainly for clean stuff. So rather than think you have to strum every chord, I mean, if you strum through a chord, there is no way that you can play two notes at exactly the same time. You know, you can't get those two by kind of there, but it's never going to be perfectly aligned. So what I do is I actually use these three on the right hand. If you think of that, what's that Michael Jackson tune? It also gives you a different tone. You know, the pick can be quite harsh, but the fingers, there's something beautiful about it. I mean, even if you play... sounds totally different than that kind of sound. So hybrid picking, if you are interested in that, like I say, I would start with like the Pentatonics, but don't forget it's not only for single line playing. You can use it with your chords and get kind of really creative with it, yeah. Does that answer the question, Fernando? Wicked. Any other questions? Any others? No. Right, okay. So back to this. What I wanted to say was, you know, we did the whole pentatonic thing. Let me just get a lead tone again. We did the whole pentatonic thing, didn't we? If you are new to this interval thing, what I would do is think the full scale has to be Dorian. But rather than add in those two notes straight away, and then we get a 3-note per string pattern, you know, which sounds like a shred thing, I would limit myself to just adding in one interval from that. So we think the pentatonic 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. We actually have a gap between 1 and flat 3, so we've got the 9th. It's there again. And that has a totally different characteristic over that sound. That's where we're starting to get a bit more interesting. So if I play over that same E minor 7 backing track now, I'm going to use this 6-note scale. Some people call them hexatonics. I think that's just a fancy word to try and sound a bit more intelligent. But I'm just going to limit myself to those 6, and let's see what happens. That's that 9th. Hopefully you can hear that sounds a little bit more sophisticated than just already. But what I would do after that is get rid of that note again, that 9th, and look for the other note that's missing from the pentatonic scale. So... and this is where we're starting to get into a bit of Santana territory. This is the major 6th, so that is going to really sound like the Dorian sound if I play over this. So again, I'm going to play over that same backing track. I'm just going to limit myself to the pentatonic plus this major 6th, or hexatonic if you like, and let's hear how that sounds. That's that. Can you hear how the flavor of that just sounds a bit more sophisticated, I guess that's the word to use, than just a straight pentatonic. But if you add them both in together, now we've got the full Dorian scale, you get... And that is still taking the fundamentals from this pentatonic scale, essentially. That's how I've grown. I develop language with all three of those, pentatonic and those two hexatonics that we discussed, and just see where it goes. Are there any questions about that before I move on? Anyone at all? You're all very shy today. Only Fernando's helping me out. But yeah, I mean, you could do this with all three of the chord types, essentially. So we mentioned before, like, major 7. I've got a major 7 backing track here. I would take a pentatonic that would work with the major 7 chord, which could be E major. And look for intervals that aren't there. So if we look at the intervals in the major pentatonic, you've got root, you've got the major 2nd, major 3rd, then we've got the 5th, 6th, and then the root. So the first note that we could actually add in here would be some type of 4th. I told you earlier that Lydian would probably be the best to sit over this, so a sharp 4, so we get... And I would do the whole same limitation exercise with that. Then I'd get rid of it, I'd look for the other note that was missing from there, and add that in, so the major 7. And then you'd work with the full Lydian scale. But the whole idea behind this is the limitation is actually the key. When you have these 7 notes all together, the temptation is to just blast through the scale. This kind of thing, which doesn't always sound musical, you want to limit yourself to find the phrasing, I always find. So maybe if I give this a go, this is over like, I think, a static, like major 7 chord or major 7 sharp 11, and this would be the Lydian scale. That's that sharp 4. Pentatonic. Sharp 11. That's where I think the kind of musicality can come from, via those limitations. Any questions? Oh, yeah. Oh, Spain. Oh, okay. That's getting a bit more complex. Yeah. So you mean when we approach chord changes? Yeah. So that's a little bit different from what we've been doing here, the kind of static stuff. Spain, does everyone know that tune by Chick Corea? So let me think if I can remember the changes. Yeah, okay. So, Spain is one of them. Chick Corea, I mean, R.I.P., absolute hero of mine. But it's a really, really cool tune, and I think it's made famous by guitarists as well. I mean, Frank Gambale, Tom Quayle even. Again, I'm mentioning him, my old teacher. They do amazing versions of this track. But with that kind of stuff, you have to approach it in a different way. You can't get away with playing one scale fits all, essentially. You have to view those chords as separate entities. Of course, there's common themes throughout these. If we actually talk about those chords, you've got G major 7, F sharp 7 altered. We've got a 2-5-1 in D, so E minor 7, A7 or A7 altered, D major 7, G major 7 sharp 11. Then we get this C sharp 7 altered, F sharp 7 altered, back to B minor, to B7 altered. Now the key with this is that you really need to be able to see the chords moving, and the interval way really does help with that. But a good thing to do is to be able to like kind of practice arpeggios with this before you would do the scales. So you do the whole, you know, this kind of sound. I know they can sound kind of boring, but to be able to see where those intervals are, that's the thing which helped me. The other thing is to identify like a scale type that you want to play over each chord. So G major 7, Lydian. That could work. Over F sharp 7, you can play like F sharp 7 altered. Over E, E Dorian. Over A7. Actually, you can play diminished over that. I've just thought about that now. You can play that. Over that D major 7, you can play like D major or D Lydian, I guess. Back to G major 7 or G Lydian. Over the C sharp 7, altered, you could play like a C sharp, either altered or diminished, and then over F sharp 7, altered. B Dorian to B altered. And that leads us nice back to home. I don't think I've got the backing track with me, but the idea would be to see if you can connect them. We could do it with like an easier example would be a blues, you know, the typical. And then the 5 chord. What I would do is take an arpeggio shape, so like A7. Look for the lowest note within that position, D7. E7, this is going to be tricky in this position. And then back to A. You could start, obviously, if you think of the structure, like 2, 3, 4. D7. So I'm looking for the next nearest note in the direction that I'm moving. D7. Hopefully you can hear the changes without there being any chords there. A7. Now we're going to get to E7. D7. A7. E7. So the next time we go around, we're not starting from that same route. And this, obviously, it will resolve eventually, but it's just a really good way. Hopefully you can hear changes if I go. You can hear that D7, A7. Continue on. Does that make sense? So that's the way you could do it with any changes, Spain, whatever. That's just a really nice way of being able, can you see the next nearest note in the direction that you're moving? And then apply it, obviously, to your phrasing that you already have. So I'm looking for the next nearest note of D. E. That kind of thing. You practice really slow, really simple, but it just helps you to kind of visualize where those changes are, if that makes sense. Wicked. Was there any other questions? Did I see a hand there, man? Yeah, man. Sorry. Yeah. How do I approach writing tunes? With Owain. Right, so we have a really weird process. For those of you who don't know, Owain is like ridiculous composer, guitarist, keyboard player, producer. And we met actually just at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'd always kind of wanted to write original stuff, but never knew where to begin. And I always thought that they sucked every demo that I wrote. And weirdly, I mean, I won't go into too many details, but something happened and we both met, and it turns out we were both fans of each other's work. And so I sent a demo to him, and I said, man, is this just worthy of putting in the bin? And the next day, he sent me like the full track, the track I played at the beginning there, Sky Blue Pink, completely finished, just without a mix and master. And it kind of made me realize, okay, maybe there are some things in there. My approach for like writing tunes, that tune at the beginning there, Sky Blue Pink, that actually came from like a chordal thing that I was working on, where I'll play the intro for you if I can without feedback. Are we getting a little bit of feedback there? Right. So the intro to that tune. So the idea was that I was thinking in E major from the beginning, but I had this C sharp minor 9 sound. And rather than think, can I do something diatonic, from within the scale, I thought, why can't I move the root note chromatically? So this was like the thought process. So that's gone. And then there's the B moving chromatically down. That's the B flat. A. E, wherever that bit is. The next bit, that's not as chromatic. It's going back to basically an E in first inversion. And then, where were we? A, B, chromatic, back to E. So that kind of idea sparked the whole tune then. It was writing on top that was the fun bit, I guess, to figure out a riff and stuff like that based around the same chord. It's pretty much diatonic except for this little bit of reharm. With Wayne, we have a bit of a different process. So on the collab album, Tredemption, we called that, we basically, I would write one half of a tune, so maybe like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and then he would write the second half, and that's always how we've done it. It's usually quite a quick process. Like we wrote and recorded the whole of Redemption, I think, in 3 weeks, just from sending demos backwards and forwards for those days. The thing which we had to wait for was actually Henrik's bass solo. That's why it was delayed a little bit. But when we write together, I'll usually like write a groove or a melody or something like that first, and then he will harmonize around it, or I will try and program some really bad keys with reharms and stuff. But if you're into reharms and working with melodies, there's a cool exercise you can do where if we take like the note E, open string, because it makes this easier, what I want to do is figure out a chord that works with that melody note. So it could be this, could be that, any chord type you want. Then we're going to move the root note chromatically. So I want F, but I still want this as the melody note. So I could pick, if I want to get really dangerous and adventurous, or it could be something weird like move chromatically up, but keep that root note, that melody note the same. So I could take something diatonic if I want, like F sharp minor 7 to the E major. Could be F sharp dominant 7. Could be any of these weird sounds. But the idea is that we keep moving the root note chromatically to get different chords with that melody note. So if you're into dirty loops and that kind of stuff, this is kind of what they do. There are a few rules around it. You have secondary dominance, tritone substitution, past and diminished, all that kind of stuff. But eventually it becomes like you just find a chord that sits well, so you can move through. It's there. And then we're back to E. So we literally look for ways of navigating that and to make it sound a bit cooler. Like there's some weird ones in UTFF. I think, is it this one? Oh, sorry, let me just get that up. Okay. This bit, oh sorry, the bass solo even, maybe. Where are we? Okay, so this, and then we've got a major over 9 over it, sorry, and then that's all diatonic. Back to this. It's got the 9th in there, but a minor 7, I think. Diatonic. Major 7. Non-diatonic, if that makes sense. So that progression there, that's where we step out. Moves to diatonic, non-diatonic, and then diatonic. Here we're going to go a bit weird with the chromatic movement. Kind of stuff, but it's seeing things that fit with the melody, if that makes sense. You can do chromatic medians, that's another big thing. Chromatic medians, for it sounds like a crazy word, but it's essentially when you move in minor thirds. Sorry. And it'll come back, or major thirds, you can go. Take one chord type and experiment with that, like. Eventually you'll get back to, if we do one more, and then we're back home kind of thing. So that's another cool thing to experiment in your writing process, you know. But does that answer the question? Wicked, man. Have we got time? Yeah. Right then, guys. Thank you very much. My name is Jack Gardiner. I hope you enjoyed all of that. I think we're at time now. If you are interested in CDs, I do have copies of Shredemption and Escapades. I think they'll be over there. But I just want to say a massive thanks again for all of you listening to me ramble on about intervals. Guys, I hope you have a great rest of the show. If you're around, come and say hey. Let's hang. Cheers.